It's happening. Is it happening?
Yes.
Our faces on Facebook? All right. We're here at, what, 2 minutes till? 1 minute till? Micah, good to see your face. I just admitted that I've never done quite this thing in all these COVID days. Are people coming? We won't start with any of the wonderful juicy stuff until 9 o'clock, so we won't exclude anybody.
Well, let's say I want to say the important thing before we get started, and that is, I sure am glad our congregations have this historic link. I mean, we're young, we're only 166 years. I think you're like 175, but it goes so beyond the congregations because of you. I just want to say, Scott, publicly that when the Talmud says, make a friend and go up a step, I've been looking forward to this morning just to see your face. So I mean that, and I'm glad our congregations are an excuse for our friendship.
Amen. Amen. I know, clergy are obliged to say these things, but it's actually true with Micah and me. I don't know how it, I just got here and anyway, Micah's a dear friend and I'm grateful for you, friend.
Likewise.
So this is a gift. Actually, we've gotten to see each other a little bit for a while in a small group that was gathering on Monday afternoons with Scott Morris. He pulled the group together. It's interesting how that group started very large, and the ones who were most regular by the numbers were astonishingly interfaith. Anwar was just every week, and anyway, that was a lovely group as well. It's actually part of what got me thinking about this. It was gathered around COVID ideas, and then I'm looking at these rich differences in practices and how we respond. And so the idea of talking to you about Sabbath kind of came into view, I think, probably in response to those. Let me say first, so Robin doesn't have to jump up and down and yell flags at me. This is folks who are watching. Here's how it's going to work. Micah and I are going to talk for about a half an hour, for about 30 minutes, and then make sure we keep 15 minutes for your questions. Robin will be fielding those on the Facebook comments, those kind of things. And if you are watching on a smart TV, which I don't know what that means, you can't do that apparently, but you're welcome to email Robin a comment, rbanks@calvarymemphis.org. So those are the wild cards. It's Stump the Rabbi for the last 15 minutes, and it'll all be yours. I'm guessing everybody on here knows Micah Greenstein because everybody in Memphis knows Micah Greenstein, or they think they do. They've seen he's senior rabbi at Temple Israel. I was Googling my friend and looking on the website. Only 8 senior rabbis, is that right? In the 166-year history of Temple Israel. That's just an astonishing. It's just an astonishing statement that rabbis are staying and investing themselves for this length of time in Memphis, in the South, right? In a place that has not always been very hospitable to Jewish communities. Anyway, welcome, Micah.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to be here.
Yeah, so Sabbath keeping was on my mind because the world kind of just got canceled, right? Things came to a halt. We didn't choose it. We didn't make it a spiritual practice unless we were given some parameters or some ways of talking about that from our traditions, maybe. But it did halt, and so it's been on my mind, and I wanted to hear some of your thoughts about it. And I thought we'd just kick it off with just something personal. I'm just wondering when Sabbath, Shabbat, when for you at some moment became more poignant, or there was a moment when you realized, oh, this is what it means, the thing that we've always done and that I've never known not to do. Do you have an anecdote or an instance that?
Well, sure. First, let me state for the record, I can't recall my first Shabbat in the world because it was the occasion of my bris, my ritual circumcision. So it's
Yeah.
fortunate that I don't recall that. It took me a year to walk. But your question triggers spaces and places that live in Jewish time, since Sabbath as Shabbat, summer camp, where everything stops on Friday evening. You dress in white, you sing, you just be instead of do. The calendar's different. Having spent most of my childhood and when I lived in Israel, that's also a place that lives in Jewish time. So Friday's a half work day. People buy flowers, and since homes are all within driving distance, because you can go, really most of the population of Israel lives within an hour and a half. So that's why it's the 7th happiest nation in the world, I believe. The reason for that on that happiness index is Sabbath, that grandkids and kids can pick up the flowers, leave the army base, go home and spend Friday night dinner and Saturday. Saturday's just completely like Sunday, the Lord's Day in America. So my memories of Shabbat go to those places that live in Jewish time.
It's the 7th. I've never heard this. The 7th on the happiness index. 7th happiest country. I mean, unfortunately, this is very sad, right? Because the Western conscience mind goes to war, the problems in the Middle East. When we say the Middle, you're right. In this part of the country,
right.
Struggles.
Sure. Viewers can find that index. America, sadly, is like 16th or 18th. I'm not sure which. Maybe we moved up. But when the country shuts down in a good way, and not a COVID way, but about going home to family, being with the ones you love, it makes you happier.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting too, because as a Christian, I worry that I often have had a very, and a Western Christian, just a Western human, but, a very individualistic mindset when it comes to spiritual practices and whatnot.
Sure.
So if Sabbath sounds interesting, it's like, of course, I need to learn. I heard that the founder of Wired magazine turns off his phone for 24 hours a day. I mean, 24 hours a week, not a day, but a week, which is radical. We can't think of that. But what you're describing is a whole community, a whole nation that has adopted this rhythm, or that hasn't let it go. That's different, right?
Well, I don't want to mislead, because I'm glad you mentioned, it was at Wired magazine.
I think so.
I think Jews and Christians and Muslims are the same, and all people, in seeking spiritual self-help guides. And borrowing the Sabbath idea to stay sane, like this internet Sabbath. I mean, think about how many phrases incorporate that. And I think that's why we need religion even more than spirituality. I mean, I see religion at its best like Calvary and hopefully Temple, but I've experienced at your place as sacred community, bringing people together for a shared quest, versus my deeply spiritual alone time yesterday in nature on the Green Line jogging, which was how I observed the Sabbath individually. But it is a time to pause. Oh, I just also want to say, Suzanne Heming, most of my office people can see her work. And when you talk about taking a time to pause, one of the great rabbis who founded Reconstructionist Judaism, Mordechai Kaplan, used to say that an artist can't continually wield the brush. The artist has to stop painting at times to freshen the vision of the object, the meaning of which is to be expressed on the canvas. So living is also an art. And the Shabbat represents those moments, if you will, according to Kaplan, when we pause in our brushwork to renew our vision of the object. And having done so, we take ourselves to our painting with a new vision, I guess, renewed energy, a recharge, If God in the Bible resold himself, SOULED,
Yeah.
we have no excuse. That's the idea for the individual. But when you talk about the communal, it's more than private time for introspection. You know, Shabbat's more than a pleasant day away from the office. It's supposed to be an intrinsically Jewish experience, which means that it's structured in a Jewish fashion. So you do have community roots and practices to draw, like Isaiah 58 says, you shall call the Sabbath a delight. The Hebrew word is oneg. So our tradition amplifies on what does that mean? What is joy? Now, if you ask most Jews from Temple Israel, they'll tell you that, oh, oneg Shabbat are the punch and cookies after services at Temple that they miss, especially the chocolate punch that we used to have. But
It's deviled eggs here. Yeah.
oh, is it real? Oh, good. But the idea, the category of joy can mean celebration and relaxation, sharing times with loved ones, enjoying the beauty of nature, eating a leisurely meal filled with songs, visiting with friends and relatives, taking a leisurely stroll, reading, listening to music. All of these are appropriate expressions of this commandment. Call the Sabbath a delight. Since Jewish tradition, I got in trouble once. I spoke at a singles conference, and I left out how Jewish tradition even recommended sexual relations between husband and wife on the Sabbath. It works once if you're married. I told it at a singles retreat, and I forgot to say between married couples. So when you talk about the community versus the individual, there are not community norms, but guideposts for, it says you shall do no work on the Sabbath. What does that mean? What is work, right?
Yeah.
What is joy? So anyway, I just wanted to make sure when you triggered that thought with this internet Sabbath, we all want to disconnect. And I think Alan Lightman, maybe we'll get to that, wrote a beautiful piece on how COVID has caused a worldwide Sabbath. But for the integrity of your question, yes, there are community and individual approaches to Shabbat.
Well, and it begs, I just love the happiness connection, because I think we've been taught that happiness is our own responsibility. We're responsible for our own happiness, as if we can achieve it by ourselves. Religion, I had a friend in Little Rock who used to say, I'm religious, I'm not spiritual. He was a psychiatrist. and I kind of love that. You know,
I love that.
Religious, ligio has the same root as ligament. It's what ties bones together.
Nice.
And actually,
nice.
Your body's not going to work well if there's not something that holds it together, and that's a constraint, but it's also what allows it to make its way through the world. And that's what feels like what you're describing is like we actually accept as a community certain constraints on our life so that we can flourish, whether that means pausing long enough to reflect on why we're doing what we're doing so we don't just charge off ahead, create something beautiful, we have the space to look around. That's I love those connections that and at the end of the day maybe the personal is communal. We can't find joy by ourselves, and Sabbath can teach us that. I'd love to hear more about the imposed Sabbath that we're in right now, that you're mentioning, and this also might be a time to talk a little bit. I'll let you go where you want with it, but we hear things like, you know, people are hearing bird songs that haven't been heard in a long time. We know that the sky is clearing. We know that there have been ecological upsides to a devastating experience for humans that we're living through. I'd love to hear more about this, looking through the lens of Sabbath keeping as an intentional practice, what you see as this imposed Sabbath, and maybe what it has to do with creation as well, as a piece of that. Is that a question?
Oh, it is. I mean, full disclosure, because being with you is as natural as breathing. I didn't prepare notes except for Alan Lightman's article on Sabbath.
Nice.
I reread it, and I just want to quote from it.
Mm-hmm.
You said we were going to be talking about Sabbath. You mentioned Heschel and you mentioned COVID. So we can get to Heschel later. But in Alan's must-read article, I think it was back in April, it was in the Atlantic. He speaks of how this virus has caused more than staggering suffering and loss of life. And I'm quoting him now. He says, that tragedy cannot be overstated. For years, we will be trying to rebuild this broken world. But perhaps, he says, the slower lifestyle in these months can help put the pieces back together. And perhaps a more contemplative, deliberate way of living can become permanent. This terrible disaster has freed us from the prison of our time-driven lives. So, Scott, he links the frightening COVID-19 to forcing the world to celebrate the essence of the Sabbath, or as he puts it in non-religious but deeply spiritual language. I want to quote him. He says, because Alan calls himself a spiritual atheist, but he's among the most, well, we'll leave it at that. He says, by forcing many of us to slow down, to spend more time in personal reflection, away from the noise and heave of the world, with more quiet time, more stillness, we have an opportunity to think about who we are as individuals and as a society. The virus has forced us to notice we have been living too fast. We have sold our inner selves to the devil of speed, efficiency, money, hyperconnectivity, what we call progress. At home, time and space have opened up our minds. In bad times, innovation can occur in habits of mind as well as in new technologies. The frightening COVID-19 pandemic may be creating such a change now by forcing many of us to slow down. I'll stop there. But it's your point.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Your point, and he's just a brilliant writer, as I know you share that view too.
That's fantastic, and I love that it's. I don't know. We're so bent on the freedom of the individual will, which I'm pro, that we can't imagine that something that's imposed upon us could actually lead us into happiness. Anything at all, right?
Well, expand on that. I love that thought. What do you mean?
I just well, I'm interested in happiness studies too, and I'm also sensitive to the idea that joy might be something bigger. But I'm just interested because part of what these studies tell us is that we actually don't know very well what makes us happy. And that keeps us on that treadmill that he's describing, that we're rushing on ahead without actually pausing and deciding, would this make us, is this actually leading to flourishing? Is this actually leading to joy? And it was imposed on us.
Yeah, I mean, this may not be where you want to go, but
it is.
When you talk about joy and happiness, I'm reminded in the Genesis, that shared scripture that we share, Eve, the first spouse, is actually called in Hebrew Ezer Kenegdo, which means helper opposite. So you'd think, like, don't you want a spouse who'll make you happy? Like, why would you want a helper opposite? And the rabbis suggest that you don't want someone who'll make you happy. You want someone who will make you better. And if you find someone who'll make you better, you'll also be happy, but far more. And so I think part of the purpose of the Sabbath, I hadn't thought about it till you threw it out, is not to impose rules, but to open up possibilities for finding joy and for improving yourself. So for instance, you're supposed to cease from commerce and give back. The irony is that the weekend now is when people go shopping.
Yeah.
But Shabbat is a reminder not only of creation, but of the exodus from Egypt and remembering the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, and all that, and saying, I am going to recharge what really matters and become a better version of myself by getting back to who I am, not artificial material. I mean, I remember early on as a rabbi here, Oak Court Mall is out in West Nashville compared to Calvary, East Memphis. The way I used to observe Sabbath was when my child wanted to get something at the mall, I don't go shopping. That's my protest, because Shabbat means to go on strike, literally means to go on strike.
Does it?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be worried about, the rabbi's going to be seen, at Macy's on a Saturday afternoon. No, the parking lot was my border. It's like I'm a huge Cincinnati Reds fan. I remember they came for an exhibition game, and there's some things more important. Now, you can technically keep the law by walking to the game. You didn't drive to it, because that would be lighting a fire in an Orthodox in terms of what those rules are you can and cannot do. If the TV goes on by remote, you didn't turn it on. But I'm about the spirit of Shabbat, not the letter of the law, but the spirit. And I think that's what you're bringing out.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. The commerce thing is really interesting and does seem important, especially here and now today in the life we live. One of the pieces that it feels like to me that it's always communicated, this tying it to commerce, tying it to productivity, this kind of saying, don't produce and see if you're still there. Right? I mean, because I just feel like we run through our weeks and think that who we are is what we've produced or what's been reflected back to us. And I've just found it, the tie to work always felt like it was saying, you need to stop and be and accept that actually God invested you with worth before you went off and did anything. And it's still there. I just feel like I unlearned that 6 days a week, and I wish I had a Sabbath practice to remind me of it yet again. I mean,
Well, it's the sermon you could give a Calvary temple or any place that net worth isn't self-worth, right? I mean, everybody knows that, but yet we don't see the cumulative effect of this hyper commerce mindset that we live in.
Yeah, we know it, but do we really know it in our bones? Do we really, in the way we respond to the world?
We stop, right? Because that's what Shabbat's supposed to make you do. But it takes an active will in today's world, doesn't it? It doesn't happen naturally.
Absolutely. Let's talk about shalom, right? Isn't so? We've talked about joy. We talked about happiness. There's this sense. Flannery O'Connor had this crazy thing. She used to say that Southerners write about freaks because we still know how to recognize one. We are one. But this idea that you have to have a conception of what is whole to actually describe what is broken and how we might build back toward what is whole. I feel like part of the Jewish tradition is that there is something called shalom, this wholeness to which we are asked to build a world into, right? And that Sabbath-keeping maybe participates in this larger work of achieving shalom. Is that right? I mean, they're related? Tell me about shalom.
Well, conceptually they are. Etymologically, linguistically, not necessarily, but you're onto something really powerful. Most people think shalom is peace. It's far greater than that word. It does mean, as you invoked, wholeness, harmony, balance, completeness, bringing shalom to a broken world and being God's helping hands in that endeavor. It's why you're in the heart of the city doing shalom work. It's easier to leave Second and Adams. And when people say, oh, I feel so close to God out in the country, of course you do, because you're away from repairing God's world. Unless you make the farm look prettier from being craggy rocks, and then you're also being God's helping hand. So shalom is about restoring tikkun olam, repairing the world. Shabbat it's said by the early rabbis, if the whole world observed 2 continuous Shabbats, practicing the spirit of shalom and oneg, joy, and remembering God as one, and being instead of doing, then the rabbis say redemption will come. The messianic age will come if the whole world observed it twice. But they knew it probably is going to take a while for that to happen.
I love that though, and I'd be curious is Alan Lightman a physicist? He's a scientist, yeah.
Yes, he is. He's a physicist.
But we're thinking about what our scientific friends, maybe our biology folks or the ecology folks that have data would say. What would really happen if 2 in a row? I'd be curious to what the rabbis were actually onto. I bet somebody's looked into it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I think also shalom is a moral ideal, not just a nice idea. When we talk about what distinguishes us, it says in the Bible we share that your animals and though anyone who lives among you shall observe and keep this idea.
The alien in your midst.
There you go. Especially, absolutely. And I think that suggests, Scott, what differentiates humans from all other creatures is our ability to make moral choices, our conscience. That is, and to bring Heschel into this, who called the Sabbath an island in time, that all our religions talk about holy places, whether Jerusalem, Mecca, the Vatican, our temple and your church. But the radical idea here is that time itself is holy. And so I learned in seminary that Shabbat seems like an obvious way to end the week, but that's actually looking at it backwards. The only reason for the week is to have the weekend, to have Shabbat. And that's unlike any other common calendrical unit. The week was invented for social purposes. A day is one rotation of the earth. A month is a revolution of the moon around the earth. What's a year? It's a revolution of the earth around the sun, right? A week, though, a week doesn't correspond to anything in nature. Its purpose isn't to mark, it doesn't mark a natural phenomenon, right? It creates a social one based on the idea that people shouldn't spend their whole lives working. So it is a very radical idea in the scheme of nature, because it requires, I think, this gift that God has given each of us as humans to be in awe and wonder at the miracle of being and to self-reflect on that. I love my granddog, but I don't see my dog doing that.
Yeah, no. Well, it's Labor Day weekend, and it strikes me that you're talking about this relationship between Sabbath and work. I mean, are there other ways that Sabbath keeping actually could alter the way we think and talk and act as productive people? How do we see labor? How do we see human labor?
That's a good one. When people talk about, all the commandments that are derived from our shared scripture, Sabbath, charity, deeds of loving kindness. One that just fell into complete, people don't talk about, even though our amazing Catholic friends and the bishop with whom we worked on COVID, Bishop Talley, the diocese talks about Jubilee, the 50th year, that every 7th year is a sabbatical for the land, to let the land go fallow. The Jubilee year was never carried out. And maybe because it was a beautiful thought, but completely impractical given people's, we're not talking about socialism or capitalism. You could be a compassionate capitalist, but try letting the land go fallow for an entire year, or I'm going to cancel all debts in the 50th year. I think historians will back me up on this, that, and Jewish historians, that it was never implemented successfully, maybe because it's complicated when it comes to labor. What do you think about that? I mean, what about unions and the whole divide and worker rights? People invoke the Sabbath idea, but I haven't seen much traction on that.
Well, I don't know. I guess I haven't either because I've always lived here. But whenever you talk about Israel as a place where a lot of it, I mean, it does make me wonder what would be built up. We see our economic life is just kind of, it's the water we swim in. I mean, the difference between a left winger and a right winger in America, we're all in the same corner of the big spectrum, right? We're talking about details and how it works. Yeah, Jubilee, that's radical. That's radical. You'd have to just start from ground up and just have a, but it's also evocative to think, you know, or can I get my head around what it would require? Are there things I could bring into my conception of what makes for good labor, what makes for a healthy economy? GNP is pretty imprecise, right? There's a lot of despair that can be buried in a GNP. I don't know, I'm just rambling, but it's interesting how thinking about Sabbath does cast our minds back to the other 6 days, it seems like, and what makes for dignified work, what makes for work that honors the Sabbath, that we don't just get to this Sabbath keeping and just stop doing something.
Right. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking how, whether it's politics, which is about self-interest, or working hard to be successful and to achieve, that in many ways clashes with not just the whole God idea, but the whole Sabbath idea, that it's about others' interests, not your own. So I hope that people don't lose their idealism for this economic egalitarianism. But, you know, I will say, whenever we go to the Holy Land, whether it's to walk in the steps of Jesus or to go back to our spiritual homeland or to pray at the mosque, you know, that's the Jerusalem up here. But Israel has the same challenges that America does in terms of the divides between the haves and the have-nots. It does still have a healthcare system to provide for everyone. There is more of a community safety net, but it's becoming more and more like America, good and bad. So I just want to make sure that was said.
It's a struggle wherever we are.
That's true. It's true.
That's why we need each other. We need to be bound together.
So Scott, are the questions coming in, or is the campaign, is this the Jerry Lewis Telethon for Calvary Episcopal Church? I'm just kidding. Do we have any?
Bring y'all, type your questions in. Robin's over here. She'll field them. She'll send them our way, and we'll ramble about what you are wondering about. She'll give me a signal.
Please continue. I'm just deflecting attention because I feel like the old joke about how long does it take a rector or a rabbi to prepare an hour sermon? The answer is, I could talk for an hour right now, no preparation. How long to prepare a great 15-minute Scott Walters sermon? 3 days.
Yeah.
So we can ramble on. That's fine. I just
Absolutely.
I didn't want people to tune out of this session online. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mentioned when we were emailing, getting ready, back to Heschel, and I'm an old carpenter, so anytime somebody refers to buildings metaphorically, I perk up. He talked about ritual being an architecture of time when he talked about Sabbath, and he talked in terms of oddly, stop creating, stop working, but at the same time, Sabbath was something both received and kind of built, I guess, intentionally. But I don't know. What did he mean? Do you know what he meant by that? Especially when it feels like, again, that time all of a sudden felt like a building that fell down around us. last March. Our weeks just kind of one day became.
I just pulled out my prayer book here on the shelf. A lot of people don't.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know this is Heschel. I don't know if in your common book of prayer, they're authors who people don't necessarily know.
Yeah, for sure.
This is Heschel. I'm not sure my members realize it's him. He says, "A thought has blown the marketplace away. There is a song on the wind and joy in the trees. Shabbat arrives in the world, scattering a song in the silence of the night. Eternity utters a day."
Mm.
So when you talk about the architecture of time, it's just Friday night unless you turn it into Shabbat.
Mm. Mm.
So the rituals of lighting the candles, I always tell, I'm not prescriptive, but when I'm on vacation and away, I remember once my wife and I had to eat outside at a restaurant, not because of COVID, but just because of where we were. And I took the 2 candles on the table, I brought them together and said the blessing over the candles.
Yeah.
And we turned a vacation spot on a Friday into a Shabbat moment.
Yeah.
That may be related to this architecture of time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just another day.
Yeah.
And then you reminded me, Ahad Ha'am, who was a great East European Zionist thinker from the same area where Heschel's posterity, his ancestors came from. He said this phrase that more than Israel, meaning the Jewish people, more than the Jewish people have kept the Sabbath, has the Sabbath kept the Jewish people.
Yeah.
So in other words, when you are at the mercy of Cossacks in Russia who are, Fiddler on the Roof, everybody loves that play. It was awful over there. I mean, if it was so great, how come 2 million Jews couldn't wait to get to America as immigrants, including my own? The beauty of that Broadway play, including Sabbath scenes, is the way to be the architect of time, to create humanity amidst the inhumanity and the madness all around you. So I think that these rituals, this ligio, whatever you taught me about the root of, that this can not just ground you, but keep you growing, deepening, and becoming the best blessing you could possibly be in this lifetime that God meant for each of you, whoever you are. So, yeah, I'm into that architecture of time idea.
Love that. Okay, we've got some questions.
Micah, say more about Sabbath being not yourself. This is very different from taking vacation.
Oh, so she's someone says, say more about Sabbath being about care for the other more than yourself. It's not about taking a vacation.
Great.
Add to that, yeah.
So what you're supposed to do before you light the Sabbath candles is put money in a tzedakah box. Tzedakah is the Hebrew word for charity. It's different. Caritas is out of love. Tzedakah is the Hebrew word for justice. Justice shall you pursue. So giving to the other before you bring in the Sabbath yourself is not something that's nice to do. It's something you're commanded to do, something that you ought to do. And I know that Calvary has early learning childhood. We hear when we do the Sabbath with our littlest kids, even from babies, the first thing they do is put coins into the tzedakah box so that they learn that's the way you start the Sabbath, not just lighting candles.
And it's a physical practice like lighting a candle too. Also, but
exactly. It's very sensory. Absolutely.
Interesting. What else we have?
Christine Todd, how do you work to keep shalom and Sabbath at the same time when there's so much to do?
How do you work to keep shalom and Sabbath at the same time when there's so much to do? Christine Todd said that.
Great question. One of my favorite comics is a Jewish comic named Stephen Wright. He had,
Speaking of happiness.
Well, he had these one-liners. It's called intelligent humor, but a lot of people don't think it's funny. So he would say things like, "It's a small world, but I wouldn't want to paint it."
Right.
So Christine's question is a great one. Look, the idea of 6 million Jews in America. By the way, I noted at services during the Sabbath that there are more people infected with COVID right now than there are Jewish people in the whole nation. The idea of 6 million people carrying 8 billion people on their shoulders to bring about shalom is enough to give you a spiritual hernia. Just think. So that's why this friendship, this partnership is not it's just relational. It's mission oriented. We share the same goal, but there's no way that Calvary or Temple is going to solve all of Memphis's problems. And yet I think we're meliorists, meaning while Shabbat's the ideal, the goal is to make things a little better than they were before. Yeah. So there is a lot to do, Christine. There's no way to do it all. So do the most that you can with the time that you have in the place where you are. That's my response.
And if we try to do everything, we may not do anything.
Oh, that's even better.
Right? Yeah. So and I've heard people, they're telling us now that if we would if we would not eat lunch at our desks and go for a walk around the block, we'll actually be more productive. We will actually there's an illusion of productivity too, I think, that we carry, that I'm scurrying around fixing everything and I actually have just made a great big mess. That's me.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
I love that. What else?
Something resonated when you were talking about the reality beyond politics, power, and economy and money. How do we look towards shalom, the kingdom of God, in the midst of a presidential election season that seems so complicated?
There's a question about how do we look beyond politics in an intensely divided time, even with a presidential season. How do we look for shalom out beyond that? Did I get any of that?
Yes.
Most of that. It was put much more elegantly than that. Shalom, when we're so intensely divided and in a political frame of mind, someone felt something liberating in your idea of shalom not just being about political realities. Can it help us?
Sure, because I think it reminds us to focus on the principles that ground us in goodness. The way to make that happen is where you get sucked in the rabbit holes of partisanship and people and personalities and politics. Mm-hmm. But if you are an advocate for equity or equality or peace or harmony or the oneness of humanity, I guess the point is, if God took time out to recharge and think about how to do that in creating the world, then it's incumbent on each of us too, even though it's overwhelming, to take on the whole national morass that we're in. So start somewhere. I think that's the idea also of Shabbat, is you're not free to desist from being God's press agent in this world.
Yeah. Live another way. Is there one more?
Relationships are so central to Sabbath. I find Zoom and videos so much less rewarding than in-person contact. How do we, or are you, maintaining relationships for meaningful Sabbaths at a physical distance without just retreating into nature for personal?
Relationships are so central to Sabbath. We're at a time when relationships have come. Zoom does not fill us maybe in the same way, even though it's what we have. How are you right now using the ways we have to communicate and make relationships now to live into Sabbath. Did I get that? Ish. I need to have Robin come over and speak these.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, as all these questions are. I was teaching my Sabbath group yesterday. We have Torah study. We study every Saturday morning together. And after the Facebook sharing, people on the Zoom stay afterwards. And so many pointed out that 10 years ago, we wouldn't even have this way to stay together, and how much it has meant that Temple has found a way, as Calvary has, to keep us connected. I think Shabbat's about connectivity. And we talk about relationships, there are really 3 directions to have relationships, not 4, north, south, east, west, but the rabbis speak about relating to God, to others, and to oneself. And that when you're very intentional and authentically relating in any one of those directions, it leads to all 3. So when you said you, I hope you were asking colloquially like you, but if you're asking about me and Scott, it's the Sabbath day for Scott, and he's going to be late for services in 2 minutes. We work on the Sabbath. And so I had a seminary professor who said, we're back to where we started, Scott. Make Tuesday your Sabbath, because you're going to be working all Friday and Saturday. But I know that Scott loves what he does. I love what I do. So I see it as service. But how do I renew my relationships? I always go home on Saturday afternoon. I tried Saturday night, maybe the only, and when Sabbath ends, we end it with a beautiful ceremony, actually, where the 2 Sabbath candles come together and form one big candle. I was looking for a Havdalah candle to show you. It's not within reach. And the idea, it's a beautiful way to end on, is that the 2 Sabbath candles fuse by Saturday night and form a brighter flame. And the idea is that alone, you may be strong as a light, but together, it's so much brighter and stronger. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Lovely image to end on. The world's a brighter place for you, friend. Appreciate you.
Well, thank you for making it brighter for me and for all of Memphis. And have a great Sabbath.
And blessings on your high holy days. They're coming your way. I wish safety and blessings and everything good for your community as you live through those and pray through those.
Same to you and yours. Shalom, y'all.
Peace. Shalom.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.